Nobody expected a legal filing buried inside industry paperwork to become one of the biggest conversations in the guitar world. At first, it looked like one of those stories that never leaves trade publications. A dispute between companies, technical arguments, lawyers billing by the hour, the kind of thing normal players scroll past on their way to watch pedal demos and guitar reviews. But then people started reading the details, and suddenly this was no longer a story about contracts or trademarks. It became a story about something much bigger, about who gets to decide what guitars can look like in the future. Because if this lawsuit succeeds, the instrument hanging on the wall of your local music shop 10 years from now may look very different than the one hanging there today. The company at the center of the storm was not trying to stop counterfeit guitars. That part surprised people immediately. Counterfeits are easy to understand. Fake logos, fake branding. Nobody likes those. But this case was different. The argument was that a competing guitar design had crossed a line from inspiration into imitation. The claim focused not on names or logos, but on visual identity itself. Curves, proportions, layout decisions, familiarity. On paper, the legal language sounded narrow. In reality, players immediately understood the implications. Because guitar design has never worked in clean, isolated boxes. Every player knows this, even if they have never said it out loud. Pick up 10 guitars from 10 different companies and you start noticing patterns. Shapes repeat. Ideas evolve. One company invents something. Another improves it. Another changes the price. Another makes it lighter. Another turns it into something completely unexpected. That is not cheating. That is the history of instruments. The electric guitar itself was born from iteration. Nobody invented the modern guitar in one moment. It happened piece by piece. A body shape here, a neck construction there, pickup experiments, hardware changes, small improvements layered over decades until entire categories emerged. Which is why this lawsuit immediately created discomfort. Not because people thought companies should lose protection. Most players understand why protection exists. Designing something meaningful should matter. Building a recognizable identity should matter. But players also know that if ownership expands too far, innovation starts shrinking. The strange part was how quietly the whole thing began. No dramatic announcement. No public campaign. Just letters. Conversations behind closed doors. Companies suddenly unavailable for comment. Retailers refusing to answer questions. Then somebody leaked enough details for the wider community to notice. And once players noticed, they started asking questions nobody in the industry seemed ready to answer. Where exactly is the boundary? How much similarity is too much similarity? If two guitars feel different but look related, does that matter? If a design has existed publicly for 50 years, does anyone still fully own it? Nobody had clean answers. That uncertainty became the real story. Forums exploded. Builders started giving careful interviews. YouTubers who normally reviewed pickups suddenly found themselves discussing legal philosophy. Some players argued that stronger protection was necessary. They said companies invest decades building iconic designs and should not watch competitors ride that reputation forever. Others pushed back hard. They argued that music culture only exists because ideas travel. They pointed out that entire generations learned on affordable versions of instruments they could never otherwise afford. The argument became emotional surprisingly fast. Then someone said something that shifted the conversation. During an interview, a veteran builder explained that guitars are unusual because players do not remember patents. They remember moments. Nobody says they fell in love with music because of a manufacturing claim. They remember the first riff they learned, the first stage they played, the instrument someone handed them when they could not afford one. Suddenly the conversation changed. The lawsuit stopped feeling corporate and started feeling personal. People began posting pictures of old instruments online. Cheap guitars, modified guitars, borrowed guitars, copies of famous designs, instruments held together with tape and replacement parts. Stories appeared underneath each one. This guitar got me through high school. This one belonged to my father. This one made me start writing songs. None of those stories cared about legal definitions. They cared about access. That was when manufacturers realized they had stepped into something deeper than product categories. Because players were not defending shapes. They were defending possibility. Weeks passed, and reports suggested that companies across different price ranges were responding differently. Some quietly adjusted future models. Others started consulting legal teams. Boutique builders became nervous. Larger companies appeared calmer. Nobody knew whether that meant confidence or preparation. But behind the scenes, one question reportedly dominated conversations. Not can we win? Can we afford to lose? Because losing did not only mean losing in court. Losing could mean losing public trust. Guitar players are strange customers. They care about stories. They care about history. They care about authenticity. Sometimes more than specifications. Entire brands have survived difficult periods because players believed in what they represented. Entire brands have struggled despite excellent products because players felt disconnected from a story. Suddenly this lawsuit was becoming a story. Then came the first hearing. Everyone expected dramatic speeches. Instead, the most memorable moments were simple questions. Questions that seemed harmless until people thought about them. One legal team reportedly asked whether consumers identify guitar designs as brands or as categories. Another asked whether widespread adoption strengthens ownership or weakens it. Someone else asked whether inspiration itself should become restricted. Nobody had elegant answers. Because every answer created a problem. Too much protection and the future becomes narrow. Too little and originality loses value. That tension sat in the middle of the room. Outside the courtroom, something unexpected happened. Players started exploring. Search trends for smaller builders increased. Affordable brands saw more discussion. People began comparing instruments differently. Instead of asking which company made the original, they started asking which company made the better guitar. That subtle shift scared some executives more than the lawsuit itself. Because legal wins are one thing. Changing customer behavior is another. Months later, there still was no final ruling. No decisive victory. No collapse. But the atmosphere had changed. Builders spoke more carefully. Companies explained design choices more openly. Players paid more attention to where instruments came from and why they looked the way they did. The lawsuit had already changed the industry before any judge finished deciding it. One musician described it perfectly during an interview. He said the guitar world runs on a strange agreement. Builders borrow. Players choose. History decides. The moment any one side tries to control all three, something starts breaking. That line stayed with people because it captured the discomfort everyone felt. Nobody wanted creators punished for originality. Nobody wanted culture fenced off either. Somewhere between those ideas sat the future. And maybe that is what makes this story impossible to ignore. This was never just about one company protecting a design or one builder refusing to change. It became a question every generation eventually asks. What belongs to the people who created something and what belongs to the culture that grew around it? Nobody knows how the court will answer. Maybe the claims narrow. Maybe they expand. Maybe settlements happen quietly and everyone moves on. But something already feels different now. The next great guitar might not come from a giant factory. It might come from a small builder combining old ideas in a new way. And whether that guitar reaches players may depend on decisions being argued right now in rooms most musicians will never see. That is why this lawsuit matters. Not because of who wins, because of what winning means. Every legendary guitar was once unfamiliar. Every classic design was once accused of being too strange, too derivative, too risky, too different. History usually decides later. The question now is whether history still gets the final vote.